Hi, thanks for joining me. In this video, I want to go over with you some of the basic fundamental ideas of painting. We're going to do a demonstration. We're going to apply these ideas to the demonstration. I hope you enjoy it. There's a few things I want to go over with you. The first is creating good composition. I'm going to start out here with our canvas. We're going to divide it into quarters and thirds, creating a grid. This grid is going to help you position your subject matter. Since our demonstration is going to be a landscape, I'm going to sketch in a few things here real quick. We're going to put some hills in the background. We enter the canvas on the quarters and the third marks. We leave the canvas in the quarters and third marks. We're going to put a tree in here. Again, it's going to fall in that area. This grid's going to help you position your subject matter and come up with a good composition. Okay, another thing this grid's going to show us, very important, stay out of the center. Keep your subject matter on the grid. Trees, whatever the case may be, large structures, whatever the subject matter is in the painting, keep it away from the center. The other thing too is stay away from the middle as far as the outside borders. Horizon line, for instance, bring it down, you bring it up, you keep it on that grid, you stay away from the center of the canvas, you also stay away from the center of the borders. Also, stay away from your corners. If you have a little stream coming down here, you don't want it leaving the canvas right on the corner. Move it up to the quarters and thirds, move it down to the quarters and thirds, but keep it out of the corner. So, this is what we have. We have a grid. We've divided the canvas up into quarters and thirds. We're going to use that grid to position our subject matter. We're going to stay out of the center of the canvas. We're going to stay out of the middle of the borders. If you use this, guaranteed you're going to end up with a great composition to your painting. Down the road, you want to change that, you want to experiment, God bless you. Starting out, we're going to use this. We're going to implement this also in the demonstration. You'll see how it works. So this is the first one, composition, very important. Okay, the second thing I want to talk to you about is depth and perspective. I'm going to start with our canvas again. We're going to throw a grid on there. A nice way to show perspective is using vanishing points. The vanishing points would actually be much farther out, but I like to notch the canvas somewhere to show where they are. If I followed them all the way to the end, they would enter right here. Okay, we'll start out with a building. Let's say we have an old barn. Get right on our high point here. Okay, this corner of the barn, closest to us. As things come closer, they get larger. As they go farther back, they get smaller. Okay, in a three-dimensional outlook, creating an X, this here is actually the center of that side of the barn. We drive a point straight up. There's the peak of our barn. This applies to everything. This space is even to this, but because this one is closer, this is going to be larger than this one. This corner is larger than this one. Now let's think about our hills that we were using there for a moment. Again, we enter the canvas on the quarters and thirds and we leave it on the quarters and thirds. They hook together in the quarters and thirds. All this, want to stay away from our centers. I'm going to create a small little path in here very quickly. We don't want to run this down into the corner. We stay away from the corners. Again, hits the border of the canvas on the quarters and thirds. Has to become larger as it comes forward, helping us with our depth and perspective. Horizon line, can't put it in the middle. We got to get up here somewhere. We don't want it to connect evenly with the roof. It's got to be either up or down. Now, as things are farther away, they also become muted. If it's a color, whatever the color you're using, if it's a gray, the gray becomes muted. You have to tone it down. The farther away it gets, the harder it is to see. So these hills are way back. very, very lightly. If this was, again, if this was the color would also be muted just like this is. Okay, this one's even farther back. As things come forward, they get darker, they get stronger, the contrast becomes greater, colors become more intense. Throw a little shadow down here. Let's say we have a couple of fence posts here real quick. It's a small one, it's a larger one, even larger one. As they come closer, they get larger. Not only does the post get larger, the space between them gets larger. If you have trees in here, the ones that are way back in the distance are smaller. As they come forward, they get larger. So realistically, what we're saying is, as things come closer, they get bigger. As they go farther back, they get smaller. Using our vanishing points to create perspective works great. As things go back, they get more difficult to see. As they come forward, they become more intense. Contrast increases, get darker, get lighter. If you use these things, it'll really help you as far as showing depth and perspective. Okay, the next thing I want to talk to you about is light source. We're going to very, very quickly sketch in those hills that we were talking about earlier. Drop in our whole horizon line quickly. A small little path that's working its way forward here. It's going to land on the quarters and thirds. It's not going to land in the corners. And of course, on this little road, there's going to be a couple of trees. Early on in the painting, I like to pinpoint my light source. Whatever subject matter I have, it's going to tell me where the highlights are, where the dark parts are. It's just going to give you a general overlook of what to do to make this painting look as three-dimensional as possible. I like to put an X somewhere on the canvas telling me my light source. Let's pretend real quick here the light's just peeking over the top of this mountain. Okay, that right there is going to be our light source. Now very quickly, this tree, light's going to shine down. It's going to throw a shadow. Same thing to this one. All these shadows are pointing at that light source. Say we have a little rock on the side of the road, which, same thing. Now let's say this is a hill here, a little hilly, the ground. We're going to stay on our grid, quarters and thirds, everything is quarters and thirds. No centers, no corners. All right, now this tree is growing right out of a hill. Well, we're going to throw a shadow, but this shadow is going to have a curve to it. If I curve that shadow, that automatically tells me that that ground is curved, which makes it a hill. I'm going to drop a few fence posts in here real quick. A lot of fun, 4 of them, bad number, you got to have odd numbers, 5. They're all wired together. Light source. Throws a shadow, light source, throws a shadow, throws a shadow. All these shadows are going to point at that light source. Little arrangement of trees in the back. Even these trees are going to throw a shadow based on that light source. Okay, so very important. All our shadows point towards the light source. When it comes time to highlight these trees, I know that the light source is shining on this side of the tree, so that's going to be the light side of the tree, because the light side is going to be facing the light source. So this is important also, light source. Okay, so this is where we are so far. Composition using our grid. Depth and perspective using vanishing points. intensity, contrasts, pinpointing our light source and reflecting back on it for creating shadows and highlights on subject matter. And as we go through the demonstration, we're going to reflect back on these. I'll bring them up again, showing you how I use it. Well, for starters, I think we're going to do a landscape. I like to put in some background coloring. As you can see, we're working within that composition grid. I swear by it. It really, looked at, when it was taught to me, I looked at so many paintings, and it's unbelievable how many actually use it. My left hand, I like to keep a general rule, a larger brush. Even though you can keep your acrylics wet for a fair amount of time with the medium, they do dry quickly, so you have to work accordingly. I do have a small advantage. I'm able to use both hands. I'm going to throw a couple of trees in there just to get this moving. This is kind of interesting. I take a brush, I make it wet, and while this is still wet, I can go ahead and start pulling. As I'm drawing this brush down, I'm picking up some of that Payne's gray. Now this white area, without wiping the brush, it's going to actually deposit that coloring, and then as it gets down, you see what happens. I'm going to add a little titanium white. I want to put some I'm going to put some more trees in here. I don't want it too strong. So a little Payne's gray and titanium white. Okay, now I'm also going to, same thing, dip a brush in water. Magic 3, doing things in groups of 3, 5, 7, 9, whatever. If you use an odd number in even if you're putting fence posts along a country road, the odd number seems to work. Okay, this here is going to be set back more. This is eventually going to come forward more. It's larger. It's going to be darker. It's going to start creating some perspective for us. Big fan of rivers and brooks. So we're going to do something here accordingly. Don't want to start in the middle. A little water, just wiping out. Same thing, gets bigger as it comes forward. Okay, in between these trunks we're going to put some darker color. Okay, as I look at this dark area, I notice there's a shape starting out there, which is a straight line I don't particularly care for. It takes away from that randomness. So we're going to kick up some dark over here. That creates a nice slope and some movement there. Gets away from those straight lines. And really, as you can see, we've done really very little, but just by creating the shape colors, using the effective faded colors, the strong colors, larger sizes, smaller size, you can see this thing is already starting to take shape. Alright, now I'm going to use a little water. I'm going to wash out some of this. So our little stream here is going to run behind those trees. Be careful, don't want to get too close to the center with this. But I think as you can see, it's already taking shape. Trees up here forward. Again, talking about perspective, we're on the grid, we're using quarters and thirds, we're staying out of the middle. Stick this palette up here so you can get an idea. No colors, really, just basic values, shades, get us going in the right direction. I don't know if you notice also, I have a tendency to create a pocket. The trees seem to lend out. What they're doing is they're drawing the viewer into this area, this viewing area. I don't want them to stray too far off the canvas. Trees aren't straight, they have a tendency to go like this. It gives a nice movement. Okay, so a lot more medium. Love this stuff. I want to start out very lightly. I don't want too much paint in there. Getting a rough idea where this this foreground is. This little piece of land actually kicks out at the stream a little bit. Quarters and thirds. We don't want this stopping in the center. We don't want this going up to the center. We want to keep it on the grid. Okay, I like to use the brown here, the umber. It's a warm color, brings us forward. Okay, I've reached a point in this painting where I have to start focusing on my light source. I like to see the light source here because coming out from behind those trees it really would look good, but unfortunately it's also going to push me towards the center, which I don't want to do. So what I'm going to do is there's our light source. Okay, one thing I have a tendency to do basically in all my paintings, I like to create a bit of a vignette. When you darken the corners, keeping the light in the canvas, and it kind of keeps the viewer from straying. I'd like to put a large tree in here. Just really add to it. I don't want to throw the painting too far off balance where there's just everything is on this side and nothing over here. You do have to have some balance in there. I think this tree, we might have to lean it in a little bit the other way. So we're creating like a three-dimensional basket here, sweet spot, so to speak. We're going to put this in right here. There we go. Obviously size is one of the things that's bringing us forward. Much larger than the other trees, which means it's closer to us. The nice thing about painting trees, you use a thin brush like this. As you're drawing it down, if you spin the trunk of the brush, it'll just randomly walk all over the place and give you that random growth pattern that a tree seems to have. Well, later on we're going to put more small branches. Right now we're just looking to get the basic idea. Now, I don't want to be too forgetful. We've got the other side to work on. But this is going to be farther away. It's starting up here in the foreground. It's going to work its way around the back. But this is going back, fading, getting much, when we start adding color and so on, the same thing is going to apply to the color. If this was, whatever, the green, it would fade away. The green would become very, very muted as it heads towards the background. Starting to see that there's a little bunch of trees here. It's fighting for a position. So what we're going to do, we're going to give it one. This looks a little chunky up there, so I had to chisel that down a little bit. Now I'm looking and I like what I see so far. And we're going to need a little bit more over here, which is good. This area here has become a little too faded. And as I get towards the outside edge canvas, I don't like too many sharp edges. I like to start blending and fading. I'm going to start to introduce some color into the landscape. Start with some basic yellow ochre, raw sienna, burnt sienna, cerulean blue. I'm going to use those along with the Payne's gray, the umber, and the titanium white. And out of those we can make a nice variety of colors to start out with. Our medium. The medium is Liquitex matte. For this, that works really well for me. Everybody has preferences. That happens to be mine. Okay, I'm going to start out with a little cerulean blue mixed with the Payne's gray. Tones the blue down considerably. Here's a little something I've noticed. Sometimes your canvas becomes, from working on it all the time, your canvas becomes a little bit soggy. And it will have a tendency to leave stretcher lines around the outside if you're not careful. It works real nice. Tip the canvas up. Spray a little water on the back. We'll count to 10 and that canvas will be as tight as a drum. take a little bit ahead. A lot of this blue is going to turn into green. Okay, put a little bit of this into the water area. We're coming into the foreground. There's our little vignette. Okay, our light source is going to be right here. So when you put light behind an object, it has a tendency to make that object darker. This light is actually going to travel behind these trees here, and where it does, I'm going to have to darken these up. It'll increase the contrast. Okay, so while that's still wet, take the brush dipped in water, and before that dries, we're going to pull some of that coloring back out. And being that it's a wash, it's thin enough that unless it's really dry, this will even soften it up and take it out. So I want to focus on my light source a little bit. It's right here. I'm actually going to go in now and pull the background out. Now as I'm doing this, I need to focus on not what I'm putting on, focusing on what's going on behind it. These are going to be silhouettes of trees. This is going to be the light poking through. It's really kind of fun to do. Gives you a good understanding of not only how you see things, but gives you a good understanding of your subject matter. And a little blending. Now we're going to do the same thing over here, but this row of trees, as it fades into the background, you see how light it gets right here. Now we want to kick this little cluster here, which is going to be a little cluster of bushes and trees. We want to kick that forward a little bit and separate the two of those. And a nice way to do that is basically by doing the same thing. Again, we're going to feather that in a little bit. Now you can almost see it. It almost looks like fog. It's actually just light. I do this on an awful lot of landscapes. I love it. Gives it a bit of an impressionistic touch. And what's nice is you can walk that right up to the edge of the canvas, and after it's dried, you can take a transparent wash and darken that up as it comes down, and that'll keep the light source focused in that particular area. Let's see. We'll feather this and mute it. And of course, I don't want a nice straight line of where the light stops, like it's hiding behind a wall. So now I want to use the white, but I don't want it quite as intense. Mix it down with a little medium. You see it's not quite as bright. So now that we've established our light source, it allows me to start thinking about shading, shadows, and of course, as we know, light loves to reflect in water. Right here there's light reflecting. Well, after this is going to be shaded down, and then this design, this light pattern here is going to be reversed over into the water. Gives you good reflection, makes the water look very calm. Okay, now I want to bring some warmth into the land. I'm going to use raw sienna for that. Gives a nice warmth to everything. And I know for a fact I use more raw sienna than anything else. Now again, mixing this with the medium makes a nice transparent wash. And don't forget, the one thing I can't stress enough, you have to be thinking three-dimensionally. You can't be looking at this as a flat surface. You just can't. Okay, I'm going to use some water and pull that raw sienna off them light spots. Okay, I'm going to start to introduce a little bit more light. As we start to move away from the actual light source, this will start to fade, won't be quite as bright. Okay, now I'm going to introduce cobalt blue. It has some interesting properties, easily makes a wash. It gives you a blue that's quite cold, but now I'm going to use that color because I want some coloring in here, but yet I don't want anything too warm. Okay, and I'm going to push a little Payne's gray into that cobalt blue just to take this down. Need to create that dark, mysterious areas in the forest where the light doesn't get through. And we're going to put just a little pinch in the back here, carefully. Now I need to put a little shading in the water. Okay, so here putting some dark edging here along the water line. Light's coming in from over here, falling in this direction. The land sticks up, obviously the land's higher than the water. It's going to throw a shadow. It also is really nice because when you put that dark shadow in there, now I can take highlights from the trees and put reflections in there. The simplest little line could just give you so much information. Now I'm going to take a little Payne's gray, a little cobalt, and umber. Mix the three of them together, which are right now are basically the 3-4 colors we're using in this. Light sources here behind the trees. There's not a lot getting over here. What does get over here is going to be intense. We're going to have a lot of fun here with highlights, reflections, negative light, etc., etc. But for the time being, I'm looking at the water. This massive piece of land here will throw a big shadow. Okay, one thing I want to do right now is I need to put more lighting in the water. Now, because my light source is here, it's going to light up the far side of the groundwork. Okay, now I have to start to build the trees. I'm going to go heavily into the umber on that one. For instance, these trees where they come down, the ground's going to be lit up. Okay, now this is dark here, where the background is dark. As that tree comes up through that dark background, I'm going to make it lighter. Here's a light source. This is going to be potent here in a minute once we put the yellows into it. Because of that, we want to darken that up some. The same things happened with this one. Dark on light, light on dark. And like I was saying earlier, because I have a tendency to vignette the painting, give an example, like right here's a tree and way off, you can barely see it, it's so faint, it's way back. But yet as I get towards the edge of the canvas, I'm going to actually vignette that particular item. Starting to come a little bit more forward, so we're going to use Cobalt and Payne's Gray again, but we're going to darken it right up. It's closer, you make it a little bigger, you make it a little darker. Back to our fundamentals. On these trees a little bit. Start putting in some highlights, some light reflections, shadows. Back to our palette for a moment. That's a medium. Okay, I'm going to use a little raw sienna. We're going to lighten up the side of the tree. You can't differentiate it, it's blending in at the point. So I'm going to pick up a little cobalt blue, a lot of medium of course. Okay, so now we're going to highlight this tree. Well, that right there just separated that tree from the background, so now we can at least see it. I'm going to keep the highlighted area towards the center of the painting as we get towards the edge. Again, I like to tone it down towards the edge. Okay, now we're going to use that same color. And as I was mentioning before, the dark against the light against the dark. Light sources over here. That's going to throw a nice little edge on that tree right there. Feathered in a little bit. Now we're going to come back afterwards and put some stronger highlights in there, but this is all part of the separating it out, making decisions as to what's going to get highlighted and what isn't. See, like here I saw the sunlight sneaking right between those two trees. Sure enough, this tree here picked up a little bit, and so did the one next to it. Okay, now we're going to start playing with the reflection in the water. This is one of my favorite parts. I'm going to go back in afterwards and put a wash over all the water because the water has got to be darker than the actual sky. Okay. I'm going to spend a little time working on our land sources. We do have to darken in or give it a little shape. Nothing makes something more three-dimensional in appearance and gives it a rounded look or a sharp edge. Applying a little bit of shading. You know, I want to drop a little bit more of this raw sienna into this background because it's a little bit too cold yet. The cobalt blue is an extremely cold color. Throw this way off balance if we don't put a little bit of warmth to it. Plus it makes the background real nice. This spot over here I'm not quite good with. A little too much of a pattern starting there, so I'm going to eliminate the land area and bring a little water in there. Now, our light source is right here. That is going to reflect directly into the water. The strong light area here, that's reflecting. Here's our main light source, that also is reflecting. Now of course here where it's dark, the darkness is also reflecting. As you can see, as this water goes into these land areas, all right, there's no direct reflection for light. Okay, now a little bit more Payne's gray and umber, and we have to bring in some more reflections. Now if you put a little bit of inconsistency in these reflections, it'll show a slight movement in the water. Now don't forget, the whole time we're doing this, again, composition, light source, depth and perspective. Keep those things in your mind. I don't like this pattern here, so we're going to bring this one down just a little bit to make it uneven. There we go. Readjust the shadow just a pinch, no big deal. And as you can see, this light source is throwing our shadows in a nice direction, making it believable. I can see that this little piece of land jutting out here. So if I lay a little bit of darkness in there, little bit of a shadow area, that's going to, of course, add to the depth again. And there might even be a spot for a future tree going in there. I'm not sure on that one yet. I need a very subtle amount of the Umber and Payne's gray because I want to drop a little reflection in here. Again, I'm reversing what I see here. A mirror reflection, with reverse perspective. I'm going to break that up a little bit. We don't want it too exact. And then just a little touch to show us what the actual separation is. A little bit of umber and raw sienna, creating a darker brown. So I have to get a little bit more shadow in here. This is still a little bit too flat looking. Just don't forget, it's always about a nice three-dimensional window. Okay, we need to put a little bit of sunlight in here, just bouncing off this tree. We want this wooded area here. The background has got to be a little bit darker. Darker it gets, the deeper it gets, let's say. Okay, I'm going to start bringing just a touch of color into the sides of these young trees here. Okay, the shadow on this big guy here in the foreground has got to be quite dark. This is nice and dry here, so we're going to have some fun there for a moment. I'm thinking we need a few pine trees in here just to break up the routine. Very mildly though. These are just. Geez, who would think you'd make such a tiny tree with such a large brush? Alright. I might regret it, but I'm thinking I'm going to drop one in over here also. And this is just a again, umber and Payne's gray with a lot of medium mixed into it. Okay, now as I get deeper into here, we're going to put a few more in. We need to be quite a bit darker. Getting towards the edge here, so I have to darken this up. Now, the top of this pine tree, I worked right into this silhouette here. The way that tree fades at the bottom is pushing, even though it's large, it's pushing it back farther than a comparable tree of that height and size and so on. 1, 2, 3. And this landmass here, this wooded area is really starting to have some depth to it. Okay, so now I need to focus again a little bit on the reflection. You just start putting some darks in again. I don't like to do it all at once. I like to do it a little bit at a time. Depending on the painting, I have a tendency to work in layers. I like to take my time, enjoy it. Can't think of anything I'd rather be doing, I'll tell you the truth. But it seems like every time you paint a picture, you find something new. You learn something new. Now this is too light here. The reflection here is good. The intensity of the color has to be comparable. This has more of a yellowish tint to it. I have to put a wash on that, tint that down. But right now at this point, I have the reflection where I want it. Now I notice some of these pine trees are missing their trunks. Okay, now we're going to drop in really fine trees that are off in the distance. The edge you can get with this flat brush is just unbelievable. Just the right amount of paint and medium. We're going to have to put a couple of these over here also. Get rid of them sharp points, you want it to fade. Mine here is lacking a little in something. Oh, there we go, that's what it needs. Okay, just as I use that flat brush for those small twigs, straight line, I'm going to do the exact same thing in reverse with the white color. I like to always have a few extra brushes in hand just in case I have to remove something I put in and don't like. So I'm going to tone it down a little bit at first. I don't like to use the extreme highlights until I'm right at the very end, and just use them very sparingly. We're going to tone it down a little bit and show a little bit of light in here. Those spots where the light can sneak in between the trees and highlight an area. And of course we're going to do the same here. This landmass coming in, we're going to have a dark area. And we're also going to do that here. Draw that down. A nice fade to it. Again, gives us a little more depth. We're seeing those dark silhouettes of those trees in the background there. They're not right up front looking at us, but they're way in the back, and you feel it fading away too far on you. You can even go as far as to drop in a little bit of light. And the sky shining through all that. A little bit on that side. There you go. Depending on how you use the light and the shadow, you can position anything you've got in this camera, you can position it where you want. This tree, I can make it darker, make it more intense, more detailed. That'll draw it forward, make it larger. Then here, that sunlight, back to the light source. Just hitting that tree just a little bit on its. Might even catch this one up on top a little. Just ever so mild. Yep. Okay. Well, I have to tone down this area here so it matches with what's going on there, because of a direct reflection. This color would reflect in here just a few shades darker. I'm going to use yellow ochre to do that very sparingly. Stick just a pinch of cobalt blue in there. Yeah, we've got that just about where we want it. I like to add color slowly. It's like a little bit easier to visualize. Okay, we're gonna start darkening up the edges a little bit more too right away. I notice how the vignette follows through here, then seems to fade away up here, so we have to dig in a little darker here. Aside from all the details, I like to keep a nice balance. I don't really want a picture that's too heavy on one side in value and color or subject matter. I like to fade around the edges a little bit. It's nice sometimes to take the entire painting and just tone it down a little bit, reduce the contrast, and doing that with a wash, and then afterwards going back in and bringing out the highlights. Okay, I want to start scattering in a little bit of highlight. Time reminding myself, here's the light source coming down here. It's going to shine along the edge of that land mass right there. Same thing going on here. Here, just a pinch of light sneaking through. Tiniest little indication. little bit of dry brush on these areas. Give it a nice grass effect. I'm going to tone it down a little bit as I move away from the extreme highlights. I want the same effect, but I don't want it to be too intense. It'll take away from what we're doing up front there. This here's a little raw sienna. Just, God, what a great color. It has a beautiful glow to it, and it doesn't, it's not overpowering either. You can use quite a bit of it. Back here's the land mass goes in, that water section goes in. Very, very faint indicators, not real heavy, just. And of course we can do the same thing here. Light comes in from our light source, starts hitting here on the land. Okay, I want to do the same thing. There's going to be little sections of light, especially this large one here. Let's put a little bit of highlights on that. Start giving that tree shape, making it round. Especially emphasize it on the small one, because the small one is laying, visually is laying on top of these other ones. And in order to separate them, we need to do this. And it makes it stand out against the background. Okay, same principle, we're just going to tone it down a little bit. Okay, a little bit of extreme highlighting. And just by putting that light, if nothing else, it'll make the tree stand out against the background. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. This one's right out in the open, so it's going to show more of a light reflection than any of them. I'm going to try to do a little bit of the same, not as intense. I have to tone it down a little bit. Same thing in the background here. Because we did put a little spot of light in there, and that little spot of light's going to be shining on something. As you can see, the light comes in here. See the overall where the highlights are on the trees. You know, in this direction, in that direction. Again, basic fundamental idea of light source. It just, there it is. It creates highlights on objects. it creates shadows, and then you can use all that information to make your painting three-dimensional as you want it to be, really. I see a pattern here, 1, 2, 3, and even spacing. I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to have to move that. And we're going to throw a little bit of highlight in here while we're at it. Another little thing I like to use on doing highlighting and shading on trees, a little something I call negative light. When you take an off color, I use rose a lot, I use cerulean blue, a lot of nice shades of green that work good for that. And there you go. Starts out from light, gets dark, and then gets light. Here the tree starts to fade against the background. I don't have a good edge. Knowing that going into it, already made provisions. So, and you want to use it with the same characteristics as the the positive light, the light on the other side of the tree. You don't want to go top to bottom. You just want to apply it in areas where it's needed. And sometimes you can even use it on some of the smaller ones. Not too much, obviously. Works great up here. A little area on a tree, just. And you can even use it without using the positive side. You can actually, like over here, we'll take this. There's no lighting on this tree at all. Now we can put in negative lighting. And make that look round without putting any lighting on the lights on the actual bright side. Now my water here is just a pinch too bright, so when I make it look too much like the sky, that's the way it's going to appear. I need to retain the reflection in it, so it does appear like this, but I also have to tone it down just a pinch from that to separate it. Since our cobalt blue has been our mainstay in this painting, I think we're going to go back to that. And if it's too dark, we can always kick it back up again, so it's not a big deal. Nice thin wash, not too much pigment, a lot of medium. I'm going to put a little Payne's gray in with it towards the bottom. So it isn't such an intense blue. This, of course, being the shadowed side, I'm going to try to tone this down just a little bit more. Okay, we have a dark area up here, flip it over, dark area here. Okay, now we're going to work on this reflection here just a pinch. Play with this reflection here just a little bit. trees have a little bit of lighting on them. Okay, we're reflecting the highlights on these here, this lighted area here. That's reflecting. Basically what we're doing is one of these. Okay, I have to put a little bit of edging in. Just we're getting into that shaded area, so we can't have that bright reflection anymore. Well, I had a little problem there. Still was seeing that pattern, which I didn't like, so I'm going to get rid of that one piece of land completely. Again, one of the nice parts about working with an acrylic. Some of our shadows in. And I need to put a little mid-range coloring in here also, just to get the idea that that tree actually stops somewhere in the ground. This continuously helps to give shape and form to what we're doing. Okay, now I'm going to put a little bit more effort into the reflection here. Now back to the basic colors that we started from, the umber and the Payne's gray. I'm going to drop in a little bit of shadow from the land. Just draw it down a little bit so it doesn't have a distinct edge. And just feather that down nicely. Okay, to the end now. To finish this up, we're going to put in a few more details, some highlights, maybe a few more little shadows, the small things. Just to go over with you real quick, as you can see how our grid applied in this, major subject matter on the quarters and thirds, entering and leaving the canvas on the quarters and thirds. This painting here is on the grid. Okay, we've also established our light source, which is right here. Light source is throwing our shadows. All our shadows should point to the light source. Light source is going to give us an indication as to where the highlights on the trees are going to be. And of course, with our perspective, trying to create depth, our larger subject matter in the foreground. As it goes back, it gets smaller. Our colors, as they go back, they fade. So all of these things are what we talked about earlier. This painting is done based on those basic fundamentals. So let's get going and put some of these details in. To try to enhance the water, there's a little something I like to do. I like to put a few lines in. Basically what this does is it establishes the surface of the water. Nice to come off some of these land masses also. These little Since this reflection is in the shadow area, we have to take that light color, tone it down a little bit. Then of course where our light source is, we're going to get that direct reflection. So we also want to highlight some of these. You want to keep the spacing kind of random. You don't want evenly spaced lines all the way down. These flat brushes work great. Small, thin lines. I'm going to re-emphasize the highlights here a little bit. But we don't want to take the highlights all the way out of the picture. We want to keep that outside edge dark. Just a real tiny little ones in the background. That's where that sunlight sneaks in between the trees and so on. There's always a little bit of light sneaking through somewhere, and they're really nice to emphasize that. Now I want to put in a little bit more activity on the ground here. Accent some of the grass, break up that even edge, give it a more natural appearance. You can really make the land move by putting highlights in and darks in. The smallest little indication can just add so much depth. Make a nice rough edge on top, feather in the bottom. And of course we're going to do the same thing over here. Again, just feather in that bottom a little bit. The minute you do that, that shows a little sunlight on there. You know, if I want to put a little bit behind these trees, just pretend those trees aren't there for a moment. Go ahead and put that right in. A little bit here too. And I just take a clean wet brush and draw down through these trees. That cleans the paint off of those trees. It brings those trees back in the foreground, keeps those bushes behind them. I'm going to go in here with a little bit lighter color after this. It's going to be more of this mid-range color than there is of the really strong highlights. We're going to wipe this out again. Need to darken this. Use a little. I'm going to take some of the yellow ochre out, put a little raw sienna in. Somewhat darker than the ochre. I'm going to add a little raw umber into that, just to take some of the color out. I'm trying to go back into the distance. And we're going to do a little bit of the same over here. This here just breaks up those even lined edges, make it look a little more natural. I always like having one of these little brushes around for putting in grass and background foliage on the trees. Take a small brush and beat it up. Hammer it so the edges are all distorted and off in every direction. That'll help you make a nice random pattern. I want to put a few more little highlights in here. Very, very soft. Just little indications, really. Okay, a few more small trees. The bottom where it goes into the ground, you hit that corner of the brush a little bit harder, makes it a little wider, and then gets thinner as it goes up. Okay, now we're going to go a little bit farther back, so we're going to lighten it up. Now the other thing that's going to help us as far as making our reflection look good is we're going to create a reflection for those trees right away, right in the water. Basically, it's a reverse. Now, it's a reverse with perspective. Okay, so here we're going to put some more branches in. A little bit of this raw sienna color here, work it in, create a little bit more shape to these land masses here. Try to darken the side that's facing away from the light source. Makes them look nice and round. We'll do the same thing right here. Just giving a little shape to them, that's all. Okay, now the other thing is, I want to put a little bit of foliage in here. In order to do that, I'm going to use this large filbert brush. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of raw sienna, touch of cerulean blue, and we're going to add a little bit of Payne's Gray. Now the color's right, a little bit dark. Okay, now a large filbert brush, and then I'm going to start putting a little bit of foliage in here. And we're just lightly going to dab. This here just gives us a little something going on in the foreground and helps add to our creating depth. And again, we feather it in. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. Okay, now we're going to start going a little brighter. The curve of this brush really allows you to make some really nice foliage. Gives very quickly a nice random appearance, but you have to do it carefully. It can really get out of hand in a hurry if you're not careful. And even with this, don't be afraid. You can always feather the bottoms out. You can even put a little bit behind these trees. Once you've got it in place, take your wet brush, remove what's on the trees, and now that's behind. Now we're going to add a little. Now we're going to add a little more yellow ochre, more white. So we want to bring that color right up to its peak. And this, of course, is going to be for the highlighting. And we're going to do the same thing on this side. We're going to hit these little small ones in the back here. Carefully. Doesn't take much, just a little bit. Go back in and wipe out the tree trunks right away so they're nice and clean. And there you go. Now I'm going to put in a little bit of yellow. To not only accent the highlights, but I don't want to use the white, the pure white as a highlight. I've got a very, very fine wash that I made with this yellow, And it just takes that white and tones it down. Two things I don't want on a painting when I'm done, and that's white paint and black paint. Even here where I go to my light source, I put this yellow wash on there and it just kicks that white down a little bit. I like where I am now with this. I want to add a little bit more color in the sky and in the water, and I want to bring in some burnt sienna and bring it into the land areas here. Burnt sienna, I have to say, is at the top of my list. I absolutely love this color. Not so much because of its appearance, but because of all the things I can do with it. Okay, so putting a burnt sienna wash on some of this has just toned it down, given it a little bit more of a warm feeling. And the fun part of this is now I can throw in a little bit more color, a few highlights, and we're just about there. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit more cobalt blue, just to strengthen up the color a little bit. Yeah, put more blue up in the sky. I also have to reflect that down into the water. Okay, so now I'm going to take some white, just the slightest pinch of yellow ochre, just basically so I'm not using a pure white. And I'm just going to hit a few important highlights in here. In my mind, I see a ray of light coming through here, and I just kind of hit those trees in that whole pattern. Same thing here. It's very just a few highlights on the reflection in the water. And then the same thing here. And I want to drop just a little bit in here. tree trunk here blends in a little bit too much, so I'm going to put a little highlighting down here just to separate it from the background. There, a little more emphasis on this negative light. Yeah, it's a little bit too neat here with the edges and so on. I want to throw in some leaves that have fallen into the water and give it a more natural appearance. Now these highlights on these evergreens right here, doesn't have to be a lot, doesn't have to be complete, just the slightest little indication makes a world of difference. Okay, so I'm just about done. I'm pleased with the outcome. We used our grid like we spoke of. We determined a light source. And we've got good perspective and nice depth. Okay, one last thing. Okay, our painting is complete. We went over some fundamentals like composition, depth and perspective, and light source. We implemented those ideas into the painting. I had a great time with it. I hope you did too, and until next time, enjoy.